7 years ago, during my first trip for this channel, I visited the Crocodile Zoo in Denmark. This croc zoo has one of the most diverse selection of crocodilian species in Europe and probably has the biggest collection of black caiman, and this is the only place you can see the Orinoco crocodiles. This summer I went back to check out the cool crocodilians, see what has changed, and I want to take you along during this video. Since the last visit, the croc zoo has really expanded, both inside and out. But in the basis a lot has stayed the same, and we are starting in one of the older sections of the park. The team that built the rock formations and enclosures did a great, and I would almost say smart job. You walk on a raised walkway, having a clear sight of the animals, and in the meantime clearing a space for the crocs to lay under. The epiprenum and other plants are overgrowing all of the enclosures, and this makes it look very nice and green and full. Most crocodilian species are actually pretty shy creatures, and with the raised walkways, lots of vegetation and the land areas reaching far above the ponds, there are plenty of spaces for the animals to get away from the public. In the older section, I still saw some familiar animals. Most of the bigger specimens had moved to a newer section of the park, but the Nile crocs are still in the same spot. They house a huge male, which unfortunately was hiding out of sight, making use of all the cover provided. Luckily, we got a good sight of the females, and those are still very impressive crocodilians. One of the other things that seem to have stayed the same is the fact that in some enclosures looked relatively small for a relatively large amount of animals. I'm pretty sure that all these animals are holdbacks and they are growing out, and I can imagine that having them so close together prevents any territorial issues. And I am definitely not an expert on crocodilians, so if there's anybody watching and maybe having some more insight, please let us know in the comments. I tried to speak to a keeper, unfortunately I did not have the chance, because I would love to have known their ideas on why these animals were kept this way. In this separate walkway section you can find the Chinese alligators, which are a shy species. To be fair, they were bigger as I thought them to be, so that was very cool to see. Now this species cannot be kept together as easy as most of their American counterparts, so all of these seem to be kept separate. This smaller section I really liked, with all the plants and how it was set up. I can imagine something like this as a greenhouse for my own Chileonian, so I taken back a lot of inspiration from there. And for the public, there were also some small monkeys walking around. They certainly are lovely little critters. Normally I'm not a big fan of this because these animals do create some smell, but in here you didn't really notice that. I do have to say that there are some odd combinations of animals, like the combination of the Hydrosaurus with the small monkeys, and there was an enclosure with the purple and fly river turtle, combined with Asian snakeheads and anacondas from the Amazon. I am sure for the general public this does not matter, but for a person like me, I would have not approached it in a similar manner. I do have to say that all the animals looked very healthy and well taken care of. As you can see, there are some very rare and impressive crocodilian species kept here. The Cubans are often a favorite of many, and later in the video you will find out they have a lot of Cubans. Here there was also this absolutely massive black caiman, which unfortunately was hard to get on video properly. They have quite a few black caimans, and I believe this was the first place to actually successfully breed them in Europe. Now, time to walk into the recently built newer section of this zoo. This area looked very well. It was very nicely constructed, and the bases of all the enclosures were pretty similar to the old building, but they were a whole lot bigger. There was more space for the animals, they were not as heavily stocked, and the ponds were bigger and also seemed deeper. What I also liked about these newer enclosures is that a lot of them seem to have these small, shallow ponds raised above the actual pond for the animals to lay in. So they had their own deeper pond, but if they wanted, they also had this more shallow pond that ran into the big pond, so that was really cool to see. Some parts were still under construction, so good reason to go back again in a few years. In this building, one of the first animals we found was a croc I was hoping to see again. This absolutely beautiful example of a saltwater crocodile. It was great to see him again, and this time in a bigger and cleaner pond. It was moving slowly all across the water and I really liked observing it. I have a lot of footage of this animal. I don't know any other saltwater crocodiles that look like this in Europe, maybe in Czechia. And I know there are a lot of rare species in this park alone, but to me this was the highlight of the crocodilians we got to see today. A big section of the new building is dedicated to the Orinoco crocodiles. According to my knowledge and the zoo tier list, this is the only place in Europe where you are able to see the species, so it's very cool I can share this with you. They seem to have a good selection of animals of this species from different age groups, including a few very big, very impressive animals, and I felt like seeing them in these newer enclosures compared to the first time I visited really made me appreciate just how these animals looked and how impressive they are. Next to the crocodilians, there were also some other animals and reptiles, including 2 enclosures for the Aldabra and Galapagos tortoise. Unfortunately, I was not able to spot those during my visit. I can imagine for a regular visitor, a crocodile is a crocodile. So after seeing 10 to 20 crocodiles, they all look the same, and having these different species added keeps it a bit interesting. If you exit the newer, bigger building, then you are walking outside. And everything here had the same style of building, from the quite bare and simple outdoor tortoise enclosures to the big pens with some mammals and birds. Unfortunately, most were hard to get on video because of the thick mesh. They still keep some of the American alligators outdoors. Here you can see they pump water through these black hoses, and that way you are able to heat the pond using the sun, which is pretty smart in my opinion. And then we saw something I was not expecting, and that was several enclosures with a high amount of Cuban crocodiles. There seemed to be an enclosure per age group, and there were at least 3, maybe 4 enclosures with groups of Cuban crocodiles. And this was certainly a surprise, not only to see so many, but also to actually see them in outdoor ponds on a southern island in Denmark. We will finish this video with the absolute highlight of this trip, and that was to finally see the clouded leopards. During my last visit I was not able to see them at all, and this time I spotted the tail of one while I was feeding, and I was afraid I would only get a shot of the back end of this animal. But luckily it turned and walked around, so I was able to make some good footage of this beautiful cat. And to me this was a great way to end our visit to this park.